Now, we have a memory verse in the lesson, and the memory verse comes to us from Revelation chapter 12, verse 17. I know the lesson's on chapter 13, but the memory verse is from Revelation 12, 17. I think most of us know that. And it says, "The dragon was enraged with the woman, and he went to make war with the rest of her offspring who keep the commandments of God and have the testimony of Jesus." That is the New King James Version. Go with me to Revelation 13. "Then I stood upon the sand of the sea, and I saw a beast rising up out of the sea, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and on his horns 10 crowns, and on his heads names of blasphemy. Now the beast that I saw was like a leopard, and his feet were like the feet of a bear, and his mouth was like the mouth of a lion. The dragon gave him his power, his throne, and great authority. And I saw one of the heads as it had been mortally wounded, and its deadly wound was healed. And all the world marveled and followed the beast. So they worshiped the dragon who gave authority to the beast, and they worshiped the beast, saying, 'Who is like the beast, and who is able to make war with him?' And he was given a mouth speaking great things and blasphemies. And he was given authority to continue for 42 months. And then he opened his mouth in blasphemy against God, to blaspheme his name, his tabernacle, and those who dwell in heaven. And it was granted to him to make war with the saints and to overcome them. And authority was given him over every tribe, tongue, and nation. And all who dwell upon the earth will worship him, whose names have not been written in the book of life of the Lamb, slain from the foundation of the world. If anyone has an ear, let him hear. He who leads into captivity shall go into captivity, and he who kills with the sword must be killed with the sword. Here is the patience and the faith of the saints. Then I saw another beast come up from out of the earth, and he had 2 horns like a lamb, and he spoke like a dragon. And he exercises all the authority of the first beast in his presence, and causes the earth and those who dwell in it to worship the first beast, whose deadly wound was healed. He performs great signs, so that he even makes fire come down from heaven on earth in the sight of men. And he deceives those who dwell on the earth by those signs which he was granted to do in the sight of the beast, telling those who dwell on the earth to make an image to the beast who was wounded by the sword and lived. And he was granted power to give breath to the image of the beast, that the image of the beast should both speak and cause as many as would not worship the image of the beast to be killed. And he causes all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and slave, to receive a mark on their right hand or on their foreheads, and that no one might buy or sell except the one who has the mark or the name of the beast or the number of his name. Here is wisdom. Let him who has an understanding calculate the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man, and his number is 666. So Satan and his allies is the title of our lesson. First, we're going to address our attention to the beast from the sea. Now, I'm going to tell you right away, if you don't already know, what all of the great reformers and Protestants believed about this. I thought I'd go ahead and tell you what they believed. Then we'll back up and share the reasons. Now, if this is the first time you're hearing this, I hope you put on your seatbelt. But I thought I should let you know that many of the reformers, beginning with John Wycliffe, by the way, who was a Catholic priest, he said, "We suppose that the Antichrist, the head of all these evil men, is the Pope of Rome." Fox's Book of Martyrs. John Huss, also a Catholic priest, said, "The Pope is the true Antichrist, of whom it is written that he sits in the temple of God among the people where Christ is worshipped." Then you got Martin Luther, another Catholic priest, who said, "The vicar is in the place of an absent chief. Which is such a vicar but Antichrist? I know and am certain that the papacy is the kingdom of Babylon." The same power that we're talking about here. And I should probably pause here and just mention that in Daniel 7, you got a beast with 10 horns. In Revelation 12, you got the 10 horns. Revelation 13, Revelation 17, we're all talking about the same beast, Antichrist power here. They recognize that. He just referred to Revelation 17, but it's the same beast. John Knox, Catholic priest, he said, "Yea, we doubt not to prove the kingdom of the Pope to be the kingdom and power of Antichrist. So I just wanted to show you that through Catholic history, they saw that their own institution was fulfilling the prophecies of Revelation and Daniel. Here's Charles Spurgeon, a more modern preacher. Behold upon her forehead the name Mystery Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and abominations of the earth. The Church of Rome and her teachings are a vast mountain of rubbish covering the truth of God. That's pretty strong. From the book, A Great Cloud of Witnesses, they write, Wycliffe, Tyndale, Luther, Calvin, Kramer, that's Thomas Kramer, in the 17th century, Bunyan, who wrote Pilgrim's Progress, the translators of the King James Bible, the men who published the Westminster and Baptist Confession of Faith, Sir Isaac Newton, John Wesley, George Whitefield, Jonathan Edwards, and more recently Spurgeon, Bishop J.C. Ryrie, Dr. Martin Lloyd-Jones. These men, among countless others, all saw the office of the papacy as the Antichrist. So as you study Revelation 13, all of these scholars I just mentioned unanimously believed the first beast in Revelation 13 was the papacy. So don't say, Pastor Doug, why are you doing hate speech here? You'll have to accuse all of the Protestant leaders and many Catholic leaders of the same thing. So that's what they believe. Now let's look and find out if it fits. Revelation 13:1, and I stood upon the sand of the sea, and I saw a beast rise up out of the sea. So he has 7 heads and 10 horns, and upon his horns 10 crowns, and upon his heads the names of blasphemy. So there's some blasphemy, disrespect of God that's happening here. It says, this beast arises from the sea. What does the sea or the water symbolize? You go to the Bible to get the explanation. Revelation 17:15, the angel told John, the waters that you saw are peoples and multitudes and nations and tongues. So this beast power comes up from the midst of a densely populated area, the center of civilization, and indeed Rome, which was ruling the world at the time Revelation was written, was stationed literally in a peninsula in the middle of the seas, literally as well as figuratively in the middle of an empire of people, densely populated for the time. I'll say more on that in a moment. You go to verse 2. Now the beast I saw was like a leopard. His feet were like the feet of a bear, his mouth like the mouth of a lion. So what does a beast represent in Bible prophecy? You know, people say, that's not very nice to call the Catholic Church a beast. Well, all the nations were called, and the powers were called beasts. It's not being derogatory. We think of America, we think of the American eagle. China's typically the dragon, and Russia's the what? The bear. Well, countries have always used mascots and beasts to identify them. It starts with the Bible. So you can look here, it says in Daniel 7:17, these great beasts, which are 4 kings. The 4th beast shall be the 4th kingdom. So when it talks about beasts, we're not talking about a monster. We're talking about religious political powers that rule. The ram, Daniel 8:20, which you saw having the 2 horns, they are the kings of Media and Persia. And the male goat is the king of Greece. And so they represented different kingdoms. This is established early in the Bible. Now, you'll notice if you read Daniel 7, it talks about a lion and a bear and a leopard and a dragon. Now, what do we find in Revelation 13? This beast is a conglomerate of a leopard, a lion, a bear, and the dragon is giving him his seat, his power, and great authority. So what happens here with the Roman power that rises up out of the sea is sort of got pieces of all these other empires. So who is the first beast? All right, one, it rises from the sea. Rome fits that definition. It gets its power, seat, and authority from the dragon. It's a worldwide power. It's guilty of blasphemy, rules for 42 months, gets a deadly wound that heals, persecutes God's saints, and I left one out. It has a mysterious number, 666. So I already showed you the papacy arose from the center of civilization. Who gives the beast his power and position? Revelation 13:2, the dragon gave him his power, his seat, and great authority. Now, if you look in Revelation 12, the devil is the dragon trying to kill Jesus as a baby when he's born through the Roman power, through the crucifixion. It's the Roman kingdom ruled by Caesars, what you would call pagan Rome. But pagan Rome began to fail. First, pagan Rome tried to destroy Christianity, but instead it grew, was ultimately legalized by Constantine, and Constantinople was later set up in honor of Constantine. Between the time of Constantine, about 500 years AD, Constantine was 320 AD, the church suddenly became a political institution, and it went through a great deal of change. And you can read here in history, the transfer of the emperor's residence to Constantinople. The reason they did that is the barbarians were beginning around 446. They were coming down from the north and attacking Rome. They said, we're going to move our capital of the Roman Empire from Rome to Constantinople. The transfer of the emperor's residence to Constantinople was a sad blow to the prestige of Rome, and at the time one might have predicted her speedy decline. But the development of the church and the growing authority of the Bishop of Rome, or the Pope, gave her a new lease on life and made her again the capital, this time the religious capital of the civilized world. To the succession of the Caesars came the succession of the pontiffs in Rome. When Constantine left Rome, he gave his seat to the pontiff. And so what happened was they quite literally, pagan Rome gave its seat, power, and authority to papal Rome, even gave the Pope an army. We'll talk more about that. So he receives his power, his seat, and authority from the Roman Empire. Fits this definition exactly. How far-reaching is the influence of the beast? It says in Revelation 13:3, and all the world wondered. It's a universal influence. Authority is given him over every tribe, tongue, and nation. The word Catholic means universal. Nothing wrong with the word Catholic. Did you know that the Seventh-day Adventist Church is a Catholic church? That just means, oh, that's going to get some letters. That just means that it is a global church. But what makes the Catholic Church different is it's not just a church, a denomination. It is a religious, a political power. The Vatican is an independent country on about 109 acres where ambassadors go from around the world. And the Pope certainly has international influence. And everywhere he goes, he's able to get into governments. He just came back from meeting with government leaders in Dubai. The United Nations has never assembled and met to talk to the leader of the Methodists or the Episcopalians, Church of England. They wouldn't assemble to listen to Billy Graham, but they do assemble to listen to the Pope because he is a political power. And power was given unto him to continue 42 months. So there's a time period here where it would have almost uninterrupted authority. Now, when does this time period begin? 42 months. A day in prophecy is what? A year. And that's, of course, from Ezekiel 4:6 and other verses. Tells us when interpreting these large Bible prophecies, it's typically a day for a year. So if you go 42 months, Jewish calendar, that's 42 times 30, which is 1,260 years. It's the same thing as 3.5 years, or 42 months, 3.5 years, 1,260 days, a time of the dividing of time. It's the same time period. 538 is when this time period begins, and the reason is that's when the Pope really got his political power. The legally recognized supremacy of the Pope began in 538 AD when there went into an effect a decree of Emperor Justinian making the Bishop of Rome the head over all the churches and definer of doctrines and corrector of heretics. This is not written by our church. Vigilus ascended the papal chair in 538 AD under the military protection of Berselius. And that's history of the Christian church. 538 is when basically the emperor left Rome. He gave the Pope an army, said, you're large and in charge. And they began to exercise not just religious, but political authority. And they were able to correct heretics and use force to make people believe. That started in 538. For then 1,260 years, they had that sway over Europe. That's why whenever you play chess, if you play chess, there by the king and the queen, on either side is the bishop, because in every court of Europe, there were representatives of the church approving or disapproving of the enactments and pronouncements of the king. They had an emissary from the Vatican telling them what they could and couldn't do. But then that came to an end. Now we're in Revelation 13, verse 3. I saw one of his heads as it was wounded to death, and his deadly wound was healed. And all the world wondered after the beast. So you go down 1,260 years, and exactly 1,260 years after 538 in 1798, Napoleon was now storming across Europe. And the murder of a Frenchman in Rome gave the French an excuse to occupy what they called the Eternal City. In 1798, he, Berthier, made his entrance into Rome. He abolished the papal government. Again, this is not written, this is Encyclopedia Americana. Abolished the papal government and established a secular one. That remained that way for over 100 years. And Revelation 13:10 says, "He that leads into captivity will go into captivity. He that kills with a sword must be killed with a sword." Berthier arrested the Pope, carried him into captivity in Valence, and he died there. So now we've established who the sea beast is. What were some of the activities of the sea beast? Well, what comes out of the mouth of the beast? Verse 6 of Revelation 13, he opens his mouth in what? Blasphemy against God, to blaspheme his name, his tabernacle, and them that dwell in heaven. Blasphemy, there are two biblical definitions. One is claiming the power to forgive sins. When Jesus said he could forgive sins, they said, you speak blasphemy. Claiming to be God. When Jesus said, I am God, they said, you are speaking blasphemy. Does the Catholic Church claim to have the power to forgive sins, and do they claim the prerogatives of God? Here's a quote from Pope Leo XIII. We hold upon this earth the place of God Almighty. That most Protestants would see as blasphemy. Again, Pope Leo XIII, in his encyclical letter, the supreme teacher in the church is the Roman pontiff. Union of minds, therefore, requires complete submission and obedience to the Roman pontiff as to God himself. The Bible says, the apostle said, we are not God. On April 30, 1922, Pope Pius XI said, you know that I am the Holy Father, the representative of God on the earth, the vicar of Christ, which means I am God on the earth. That's a man. Does that kind of make you gasp a little? It's a man putting himself in the place of God. Now, what about forgiveness of sins? Do they claim that? According to the book of the priests, God himself is obliged to abide by the judgment of his priests, and either not to pardon or to pardon according as they refuse or give absolution. God has to abide by what they say. The sentence of the priest proceeds, it goes first, and God subscribes to it. God must forgive or not forgive. The priest has the power, and God goes along with it. The Bible says God and God only can forgive sin. 2 Thessalonians 2:4, it tells us that he would oppose and exalt himself above all that is called God or that is worshipped, so that he sits in as God in the temple of God, showing himself that he is God. This is actually a photograph where popes sit on a special throne in the Vatican, and they're flanked by angels like the Ark of the Covenant. You know what's between the angels and the Ark of the Covenant? That's in the holy place, and that's supposed to be the mercy seat, the Shekinah presence of God. So here the Pope is sitting right where the Shekinah presence of God is supposed to be, and in the temple, in the holy place, or the Holy of Holies, actually. So I always thought that was sort of an outrageous picture for a man to be in that position. What does the beast do to the saints? Talking about the activities of the sea beast. It was given him to make war with the saints and to overcome them. I think we all know that the Roman Catholic Church was a persecuting power. Other churches have persecuted too. Even here in America, we did a little bit of our own persecuting. But nobody really has matched what happened during the Inquisition and the time period of the 1,260 years. It's estimated between 20 and 50 million Christians and Jews were killed during that time. British historian William Edward Leakey wrote that the Church of Rome has shed more innocent blood than any other institution that has ever existed among mankind will be questioned by no Protestant who has a competent knowledge of history. That's History and Rise of the Spirit of Rationalism in Europe. What happened to the beast after the 42 months? I saw one of his heads as it was wounded to death, but the deadly wound is healed. We saw when they received a wound, when Napoleon's general arrested the Pope, they lost their secular power, but it says that wound would heal. And this is something that happened. There's an actual photograph of the paper from 1928. The Roman question tonight was a thing of the past. The Vatican was at peace with Italy in affixing the autographs to the memorable document, Healing the Wound. San Francisco Chronicle. I'm sorry, I said 1928. 1929 is when this happened. And so that was the beginning of the healing. But it's continuing to heal, because some of the language Pope Francis often uses now is there has been a wound in the church. He says that frequently. I've got quotes assembled, between Protestants and Catholics that needs to be healed. He always actually incorporates that very language. So now we're going to the section on the beast rising up out of the earth under Tuesday in your lesson. Most believe this represents the United States. Another beast coming up out of the earth. He had 2 horns like a lamb. In Revelation, a lamb, good or bad? A lamb is Christ, good. Remember, we see a lamb slain in chapter 4. It's Jesus. Dragon, good or bad? Bad. So here you've got something that starts out like a lamb, ends up speaking like a dragon. America began with great religious freedom. Christianity grew. More missionaries were sent from the United States than any other place in the world, and became a haven for people to come. Why is the U.S., and North America more specifically, if waters represent a populated area, the earth must represent a comparatively unpopulated area. In 1650, I'm picking a date where there was a census before 1798. In 1650, there were about 6 million Native Americans living in the entire North America, Canada, and the U.S. Very, very few people per square mile. While at the same time, just in Europe, there were 90 million people. To help you see the disparity that's happening. That's not even counting the Middle East and Turkey, just Europe, 90 million people. So well over 100 million people in Europe, 6 million in the whole North American continent. And so it was relatively unpopulated. And look at how quickly that changed. There was like 130 million people living in North America by 1850. It just exploded. And he exercised all the power of the first beast before him, and he caused the earth and them that dwell therein to worship the first beast whose deadly wound was healed. So something's going to happen where the U.S. now, who was formed fleeing the religious persecution in Europe, is now going to turn around, and there's going to be some friendship and coming together again. Some of you remember this historic report that was given on how behind the scenes Ronald Reagan, President of the United States, worked with Pope John Paul II. My father actually met him once, to assist Poland in overthrowing communism. And that's what really started the domino effect until Yeltsin got up on the tank and he declared that communism was over. And everything changed after that. They've even got a statue of Reagan and the Pope walking together there in Poland, a bronze, because they know that was a historic confederacy of the U.S. and Catholicism, really helping to lead out in setting up a new form of the world, or a new world order, you might say. And this is a classic photograph. Here's Pope John Paul II at his funeral. But what's really scary is here you've got 3 U.S. presidents who all were technically Protestants kneeling before the Pope in the Vatican. I thought, wow. Anyway, and every president since then has, they visit with the Pope. And you'll notice the president usually will first go see the Pope, then the Pope will come and visit the President of the United States. It really was remarkable just near the end of Obama's presidency when the Pope came to the United States, and he went to all the historic places that where our government had its office. The first capital for U.S. was in New York. Pope went there, had a unified service, went to the 9/11 memorial. Philadelphia is where our government was formed. He went there. Washington, D.C., he went there. And just had, record crowds, met with Congress, all met with the Pope, went to the United Nations in one visit. And there's nothing left out. And that was a rather, I think, historic meeting. His deadly wound was healed, and what happens? All the world wonders. And people have thought, well, but, Islam is the second largest religion in the world. How are you going to get over that? Well, just this week, for the first time, he did a mass in an Islamic country last week in Dubai. The papacy has gained worldwide influence, prestige, and prominence. Now we're going to jump to the part about an image to the beast in Revelation chapter 13. According to the prophecy, what dramatic change will take place in America? It says he starts out like a lamb, but he ends up speaking like a dragon. Now, America has had the 2 horns of the lamb, where we have a government without a king and a church without a pope. We are a very religious country, but there's no head of the church. And we have political freedom, but our presidents have limited terms. We have no king. And it's made us a very unique government. And you know, since the formation of America, which largely was due to Roger Williams under the leading of the Lord, separating the church and the state, doesn't mean that you have a government that is separate from religion, which is what's happening. Now they're pushing morality out of the government, but it means that you don't have a state government. Since that time, most of the governments of the world have adopted this same form of government. Isn't that interesting? So how does a nation speak? It speaks through its laws or its legislative body. For over 100 years, the Supreme Court of the United States was all Protestant. Our founding fathers, some were deists, most were Christians. They believed we should have a separation of church and state, but they were very religious, mostly Protestant people who embraced the Protestant values. Today, on our Supreme Court, there is not a single Protestant, even with the most recent last two appointments. This is just something you can find online, the makeup of the Supreme Court. You have all Roman Catholics, one Episcopalian, Gorsuch, who was raised Roman Catholic, but Episcopalian is really the English version of that, and three who are Jews. There are no more Protestants now. This is the body that will legislate and speak for the laws of the country. May all be wonderful people. I'm just saying, I think that's an interesting development. It causes the earth and them that dwell therein to worship the first beast whose deadly wound was healed. So something is going to be a catalyst in the world. I also think it's interesting that now we have the first Jesuit pope in the history, and the Jesuits were formed specifically to fight against Protestantism. And I don't know what that catalyst is going to be. It could be a natural disaster, a war, it could be a financial disaster, all three at one time. One could lead to the other. It's going to have people become very religious very quickly. Didn't you see that during 9/11? How many remember how full the churches were right after that? People can become very religious. People are willing to sacrifice their freedoms when they're frightened. And I think you're going to see something that will be the catalyst to America saying we need a religious leader. Who is going to be the most likely candidate? Even with all of the problems the Catholic Church has, they've got very low ratings right now with some of the sexual scandals, but the Pope Francis as an individual has a very high rating. He's actually dealing with some of these things. It says, telling those who dwell on the earth to make an image to the beast who was wounded by the sword and lived. Now, I just always thought this was interesting. Here you've got the U.S. Capitol, and there you get the Vatican. An image is a likeness. And you know, right in front of the Vatican, you've got a very large Egyptian obelisk, sort of a pagan sundial. What do you have right in front of the Capitol building? The largest Egyptian obelisk in the world. It's the Washington Monument. I remember when you could still go to the top of that. Now we're going to go to the section on the mark of the beast. So on the last thing about making an image to the beast, it's telling us that something is going to happen, that the United States is going to set up a government that will actually be a religious political power that will persecute, tell people how to worship. Now, right now, it might be hard to see how could that develop. It seems like we're becoming so secular. But what you see happening historically is there are great swings that happen. When a pendulum goes too far in one direction, it seldom comes back to the center. It then swings almost all the way the other direction. Right now, America is becoming so very secular, where the government is, just absurd laws, everything from the same-sex restrooms to, just taking God out of everything. That I think there's going to be an uprising, even though 65, 70% of America is Christian, 80, 85% of America is religious. People are getting tired of God being pushed out of our daily lives, and I think when there's a crisis, there's going to be a swing that will go the other direction, and you're going to see legislation that is religious. Now, what did we just see about the court? Do we have a religious court? Every member of the Supreme Court is religious. There's no atheists on the Supreme Court. So I could see how these things can happen. Mark of the beast. Number 10, what does the second beast of Revelation 13 force all to receive? It says, he causes all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and bond, to receive a mark in their right hand or in their foreheads, that no one might buy or sell unless he receives the mark or the name of the beast or the number of his name. The first thing I want to establish is people think, when they think mark of the beast, they're thinking barcode in the hand, tattoo in the forehead. Does the Bible say the mark of the beast is that kind of mark? As soon as it says in the forehead and in the hand, if you're a Jew, your mind should go back to the verses in Deuteronomy. If you have your Bible, you might go to Deuteronomy chapter 6, for example. And there are 3 places that I know in Deuteronomy and Exodus where it tells us that that mark is a symbol. Deuteronomy chapter 6, verse 6. Now, keep in mind, if you have your Bibles open, you'll notice Deuteronomy 5, God repeats the 10 commandments. In fact, the word Deuteronomy means a repeating of the law. Chapter 5 is where he repeats the 10 commandments that you find in Exodus 20. After he repeats the 10 commandments, there's no change in the narrative here. It's a continuing discussion by Moses. You go to chapter 6, verse 6. These words I command you today shall be in your heart. Now, I just want to pause. When he said the words, 10 commandments shall be in your heart, did he mean you are to make an incision in the chest and put the words in there? Or is he using metaphors? These words shall be in your heart. You shall teach them diligently to your children. Talk of them when you sit in your house, when you walk by the way, when you lay down, when you rise up. You shall bind them as a sign on your hand. Did he literally want them to tie the 10 commandments on their hand? And he says they shall be frontlets between your eyes. That's the forehead. Did he literally want them to tie the 10 commandments on their forehead? There are some Jews who believe that. You've probably seen Orthodox Jews that put their phylacteries on. They've got a little box on their forehead. They got a little leather strap, and they take sections of scripture there. And they even staple them to the door of their house so they touch it when they come in. Some take it very literally. And, I guess there's no sin in that, but what does he mean? Tie it to your hand. Put it between your eyes. First of all, if you put it between your eyes, you can't read it. Can you read your forehead? So obviously it's a symbol. The forehead meant your thoughts. The Bible says as a man thinks in his heart. Putting it on your hand meant your actions. It meant the law of God must be in your actions or in your forehead. So when Revelation says that God's people will have the seal of God in their forehead, are all of the saved going to go around having a big stamp in their forehead in the last days? No. Mine would be easy to read because I've got a good billboard space. But and when it says in Revelation 17 that the woman's got a paragraph in her forehead, Babylon, mystery, Babylon, mother of harlots and abomination, all that written there, you going to really see someone like that with that in their forehead in the last days? No. Thy word I've hidden in my heart. It's talking about in our actions, in your hand. The Bible says whatever your hand finds to do, do it with all your might. Your hand doesn't go around by itself finding things to do. It's talking about whatever work you do. So the mark of the beast in the hand and in the forehead, these churches that are saying that they're going to tattoo us and they're going to inject a computer chip or they're going to put a barcode on, it's not what it's talking about. Might the political religious power use credit cards and chips and things to control buying and selling? Sure. But credit cards are not a sin. And if your dog has one of those, what do they call them, IFDs under his skin so he can be found when he's lost, he doesn't have the mark of the beast? So people often get hung up on the technology and they miss the spirit of what it's talking about. So what is the mark of the beast? It's something in the law. Has something to do with the law. The seal of God is where you find the word holy in the law of God, which is in the 4th commandment, that has the name of God, the title of God, the territory of God. That's what's in a seal. Name, title, territory. The mark of the beast is taking away the seal of God and putting a law of the beast in place of the law of God. Revelation, well, I'm getting ahead of myself. In Daniel chapter 3, when Nebuchadnezzar tells everyone to worship the beast or worship the image or be killed, doesn't that sound a lot like what's happening in Revelation? Those who do not worship the image will be killed. The people of God had to make a decision. Do I obey the law of God that says do not pray to images, or the law of the religious government, Babylon, and I'm going to be killed if I obey the law? They were willing to die, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Rather than disobey, God delivered them. Daniel chapter 6, Government, religious law, king of Persia makes a law, can't pray to anyone but him for 30 days. That's a religious, political law. The king made a religious law. Daniel has to decide, do I keep the first commandment that says, do not have other gods, and keep my job, or do I go to the lions and stand up for God? Daniel chose to obey. God delivered him, and his enemies were destroyed. Both cases, when they threw them in the fiery furnace, the soldiers died. The ones who put Daniel in the lion's den, they died. This is what's going to happen in the last days. There's going to be a law that is going to require every believer to decide law of God or law of man. It's going to be one of the 10 commandments. So, what is this mysterious mark? It says his number is 666. Let's identify who this power is. In Prompta Bibliotheca, according to 1913 Catholic Encyclopedia, it's a veritable encyclopedia of religious knowledge, and it will ever remain a precious mine of information. This book is quoted frequently as an authoritative Catholic source. Under the heading Papa, his name title there is Vicarius Filii Dei. This is in the Catholic Encyclopedia. Again, the title, and this is a letter you're going to have trouble reading, so I've got it written out for you. The title Vicarius Filii Dei, as well as the title Vicarius Christi, is the very common as the title of the Pope. This is a professor of history and Christian archaeology at the Catholic University in Washington, D.C. Someone wrote a letter to the Sunday Visitor, Catholic magazine. What are the letters on the Pope's crown? Now, the Pope's got many crowns he wears. And what do they signify? The letter on the Pope's crown are these, Vicarius Filii Dei, which is Latin for Vicar, Son of God. Now, if you take the official title of the Pope, you know how the Jewish priest would wear a crown, and on that crown there's a little mitre, a little placard, and it said, Holiness to the Lord. That's what he had. The Catholic Pope, on some of his mitres, it said Vicarius Filii Dei, Vicar for Christ, meaning in the place of Christ. You take the Roman numerals, it says the number of his name. Now, we can't do this with the English alphabet because our letters don't have a real numeric value. But if you know your Roman numerals, you know that they wrote with Latin letters, and each letter had a value. It's very common for them. You add up that title, it comes to 666. And I see some, you can take a picture of that off your screen. You can do the math. You can just look this up online. It's pretty common. Now, Pope Francis never wears the mitre. Here, Pope Benedict, they say that he liked to dress up in the regalia. Here he is with 4 different mitres. And they've got some that are very expensive, and some of the older ones had a placard here. You don't see it on the newer ones, because when the Protestants started saying, you know, your placard adds up to 666, they stopped wearing that. But that's what they used to have on there. But in case you question, is that really the title of the Pope? Here's a book by John Paul II. And this is page 3. Confronted with the Pope, one must make the choice. The leader of the Catholic Church is defined by the faith as the vicar of Jesus Christ. That's Vicarius Filii Dei. And is accepted as such by believers. The Pope is considered the man on earth who represents the Son of God, who takes the place of the second person of the omnipotent God of the Trinity. Taking the place of Christ on earth. Whew. So understanding 666, throughout Revelation, the number 7 represents perfection or completeness. The number 6 represents imperfection. It's the number for man. In Daniel chapter 3, when Nebuchadnezzar builds the image, it says it's 60 cubits by 6 cubits. And one scholar, Leslie Harding, said, if they don't give you the depth, it's going to be the same as the width, which means it was 60 by 6 by 6. And they were told to worship that. It's the number of man. Man was made on the what day? 6th day. First time you find 7 3 times in the Bible? Genesis chapter 2. The 7th day, the 7th day, the 7th day. Which leads us to the next part. 666 symbolizes the union of air, the union of the dragon, the beast, and the false prophet. What is the beast's mark of authority? The Catholic Catechism says, question, which is the Sabbath day? Answer, Saturday's the Sabbath day. This is in the Catholic Catechism. Question, why do we observe Sunday instead of Saturday? Answer, we observe Sunday instead of Saturday because the Catholic Church transferred the solemnity from Saturday to Sunday. Have you any other way of proving the Church's power to institute festivals of precept? Notice the answer. Had she not such power, She could not have done that which all modern religionists, most of them, agree with her. She could not have substituted the observance of Sunday, the first day of the week, for the observance of Saturday, the seventh day of a week, a change for which there is no scriptural authority. Daniel chapter 7 said the beast power would think to change times and laws. That's exactly what happened. That's why in this church we want to be consistent Christians, keep the day Jesus kept, the apostles kept, Moses kept, which is the seventh day. Man cannot change the law of God. The beast power would think to change the laws and times. By the way, only commandment that is a law and a time is the Sabbath. So, this chapter's got a lot of information there. Is the beast a government or a religious power? It says he causes as many as would not, what? Worship. It's involved with worship. The image of the beast should be killed. You notice there in Genesis, Cain and Abel, they're at the beginning. They're both told to worship the same God. They claim to worship the same God. Abel does it the way that God said. Cain says, I'm going to alter it because I can worship however I want. God does not accept Cain's worship. Cain then persecutes his brother. That same story now repeats itself in the end of time in Revelation 13. Both claiming to worship the same God. One does it his way, one does it God's way, and the wrong one persecutes the right one. That's why Jesus died. He worshiped God according to truth, and the religious leaders became aggravated by that and killed him. What effective methods will this end-time coalition utilize? It says in Revelation 13 and 14, he does great wonders so that he makes fire come down from heaven on the earth in the sight of men, and he deceives them that dwell on the earth by the means of those miracles that he has power to do. Revelation 16:14 says, they are the spirits of devils working miracles. Christ said we need to be careful in the last days, for there will be many false Christs and false prophets, and in particular, Satan is going to impersonate Christ. The devil himself can be transformed into an angel of light. As he came to Christ as an angel of light in the wilderness, he will appear in the last days. There'll be signs and wonders. Some of these counterfeit denominations and churches are going to be doing things that are going to deceive people. What will prevent God's end-time people from being deceived during this time? Isaiah 8:20, to the law and the testimony, if they speak not according to this word, there's no light in them. Amen? So what's going to keep us safe? We've got to make sure we're going by the word of God, that we know our Bibles. So, what is your response today? God is calling people out of Babylon into the safety of his remnant church. He says those that remain in Babylon, this is Revelation 17, will partake of her sins. The most fearful curses in the Bible are found in Revelation on those who worship the beast and its image and receive the mark of the beast. That's in Revelation chapter 14. So this is a very important subject because in the last days there's only two choices. You have the seal of God, or you worship the beast and have the mark of the beast. You either worship God and have his seal, or you worship the beast. There's no middle ground. There's going to be a shaking, and everyone will polarize into one of two groups. Both claim to worship God. I saw, as it were, a sea of glass, Revelation 15. I just wanted to end by giving you a little encouragement. Mingled with fire, and them that had gotten the victory over the beast and over his image and over his mark and over his number, stand on the sea of glass, having the harps of God. How many of you believe that we can get the victory over the beast? Amen? God bless you, and God willing, we'll study his word together again next week.